Good evening, everybody. My name is Ingrid Brodnik. I'm the media editor at Falter, the weekly newspaper in Vienna. And today I will be leading you through a quite interesting discussion, I think, with some remarkable guests. First of all, thank you all for coming here. I'm really astonished that there are quite so many people here, even though the weather is really nice. I'm not going to speak about that. I don't want you to feel jealous of the people outside. I think it means that you are here, that you must be quite interested in this topic. I think it is one of the most important topics of our time. Today's discussion will be about the huge surveillance programs installed by the intelligence agencies. We will talk about whistleblowers such as Edward Snowden, intelligence agencies such as the NSA or the British GCHQ, and we will also ask the question, what can the European Union do? Can it even do something? I should inform you, if you use Twitter, there's a hashtag for this event. It's no secret, hashtag no secrets. And first of all, let me introduce our guests. To my right, it's Annie Machon. She's a former MI5 intelligence officer and a whistleblower. In 1997, she informed the public that the MI5 was spying on ministers in their own government, that the MI5 lied to the public and to the government. And I think she paid quite a high price for that as well. She had to stay abroad for that. She was kind of in exile. And so perhaps you can tell us a bit about intelligence agencies and the lack of control regarding them. Then we have another interesting international guest, Raegan MacDonald. She's working as the European Policy Manager for the NGO Access Now, which tries to protect human rights in times of the internet and digital communication. Sorry, I think my microphone has something with it. Okay, so Access Now, if I'm correct, it was founded after the post-election protests and crackdown in Iran. And Access Now is also active in Brussels, where Raegan MacDonald works. And I heard earlier that she also studied in Vienna, so welcome back here. We are very glad to have you. Bitte schön. So this young guy over here, I think some of you might know, it's Max Schrems, a celebrity. Conchita Wurst is not the only Austrian who gets airtime abroad. Max Schrems also does. He became well known for suing Facebook in Ireland, and at the end of this month I think he will publish his first book about this topic. Kämpfe deine Daten. Kämpfe deine Daten. So perhaps you can tell us a bit about that as well. And to my left, it's Josef Weidenholzer, MEP, member of the European Parliament for the Social Democrats, and also a professor at the University of Linz. In the last 5 years, Mr. Weidenholzer worked a lot on regulation regarding internet freedom. And perhaps you can also talk a little bit about the possibilities within the EU and also the Social Democrats and how they are not always on the same page about this issue and what Mr. Weidenholzer thinks should be done in the next 5 years. So, first of all, to start this discussion, I think there's one really important date soon. In about 2 weeks, it will be 1 year that the world learned about the mass surveillance apparatus which was installed by the surveillance agencies. So nearly 1 year ago, the Snowden leak started. my first question is to you, Annie Machon. You worked within a spy agency, and you are following the topic of whistleblowing and accountability for intelligence agencies since the 90s. What is your opinion on the developments? Are we now, let's say, closer to reforming these spy agencies?
Well, that's a very big question, I think. Thank you all for coming. Just to give you a slightly expanded view of where I'm coming from and why I have the views I have. I worked for MI5 as a British intelligence officer in the 1990s and then resigned with my former partner, a man called David Shaler, who was the key whistleblower. He was the one that went to prison twice for exposing the crimes of others, which included not only the files on government ministers, but also illegal phone taps, so no change there. Also terrorist bombings that could and should have been prevented, and then the spies lied to cover up their mistakes. Innocent people going to prison when MI5 knew that they were innocent and they withheld that information. And also an illegal terrorist attack against Colonel Gaddafi of Libya back in 1996, which was funded and planned by MI6, the James Bond wing of British intelligence. Now, because of this, David Shaler and I ended up going public, but literally going on the run around Europe preemptively, like Edward Snowden went on the run. And we had to live in hiding for 1 year, in exile for 2 more years in France. And he went to prison not once but twice. First of all, when the British failed to extradite him from France to the UK. And then in 2002, after he'd returned to the UK voluntarily, to stand trial for a breach of what's called the Official Secrets Act, which is basically an anti-whistleblower law in the UK. That process taught me some very important lessons. First of all, how the media can be very complicit and can be manipulated by the spies and by central government in order to propagandize what they get up to. It also taught me very clearly and very personally up front what it is like to live with no secrecy, with no privacy, where your communications and your home can be bugged and where your friends can be turned against you to report back on you. And that's what happened to us. So I could not resist speaking at an event called No More Secrecy, which I took as a sort of slightly ambiguous phrase, because we have a situation here where we certainly have no more privacy, and we're trying to ensure that the governments have no more secrecy. So how are we trying to get that balance? I think Edward Snowden is obviously a hero, because the definition of a hero is someone who takes on greater forces with no hope of winning at great personal risk, but does it because he knows he has to. And that surely is exactly what he has done by exposing this endemic global panoptic surveillance state that has evolved, primarily pushed by the USA and, of course, assisted very willingly by most of our European spy agencies. So it's fantastic that he is still free a year after he went public about this, a year after he said he could not live with himself. In fact, he was willing to die to ensure that the world's population knew quite what had happened in terms of surveillance and the erosion of our privacy. And I think it's very important, not only what he did, but it's very important that we recognize what the fundamental principle is here. He wanted us to know that we are all under surveillance in the most appalling ways. And it's not just about the fact that most of us haven't got anything to hide, because we are doing nothing wrong. It's a fundamental principle of any functioning democracy that we need free communications, we need to feel secure and private, we need the basic fundamental right of privacy to have a functioning democracy. Because if we don't feel we have that privacy, if we feel that our communications are intercepted, or we are being monitored in our homes, or what we read, or what we watch, or what we communicate, or whom we associate with and plan on the internet is being watched by the spy agencies, then we will begin to self-censor. And this is why privacy is so important, that if we no longer feel that we have the free access to this sort of information that we want to ingest, we want to share with other people, we've lost all the other rights that were hard-won by our ancestors in the West over the last 500 years. The freedom of conscience, freedom of expression, freedom of thought, the freedom not to be kidnapped, tortured, and extrajudicially murdered. And that's what we're looking at now.
Let me ask one quick follow-up question. There is this, it is often said that the intelligence agencies became rogue or became uncontrolled after 9/11. Is this wrong? Because what you tell us, it happened in the 90s. So did the problem start long before that?
Well, the 90s actually were the only ethical era of MI5 and MI6's 100-year existence, I would argue. And yet, despite that, we saw so much going wrong, we felt compelled to go public and go on the run. The reason I say that is for the first 80 years in the UK, our intelligence agencies, MI5, the Domestic Security Service, MI6, the Foreign Intelligence Gathering Agency, and GCHQ, the Government Communications Headquarters, the NSA in the UK, did not officially exist for 80 years. Nobody, none of our democratic representatives could ask questions about them. They could not hold them to account. They could do whatever they wanted because they were not covered by the law. So they had always been rogue. They were put on a legal footing for the first time in 1989. And even then they bent and broke the laws. And of course, you are right, since 9/11, it's gone backwards. Where the intelligence gloves came off, as the American intelligence agencies like to say, that attack has been used not only to invade multiple countries across North Africa, the Middle East and Central Asia, it has been used to shred our basic constitutions and our basic human rights in all our countries too. And the intelligence agencies are part of that. So this is why we see their intelligence being used, fake intelligence, knowingly being fed into the political decision-making process to take our countries into illegal wars, where they are on the ground subverting countries like Libya and Syria, where in America, and I would argue that their intelligence agencies have always been pretty rogue, where in America, on the word of a faceless intelligence officer, people's names can be added to something called the CIA kill list. Every week, a list is presented to the President of the United States, and he will sign it with no questions asked, and those names, anywhere in the world, can then be assassinated by US drone strikes, and it is going on. So they are completely out of control now. I don't think there's any doubt. And what Edward Snowden revealed was the sheer scale of the monster that has been unleashed. And the surveillance aspect, the electronic surveillance aspect, is just one aspect of that.
That's really interesting. So the question we ask ourselves here is, of course, also what can we do as European citizens about that, since we cannot do so much about the US government directly. Raegan MacDonald, you are following the EU policy about digital rights professionally. What is your assessment of the first year after the Snowden revelations? Did they really influence EU policy? And now this 1 year has passed, do you think the EU is moving into the right direction? Big question, I know. You can answer with yes and no, and we skip to the next part.
Well, the trick is it's not really yes-no. It's much more complicated. First, I want to give a little background on Access. We were founded in 2009, as you mentioned, during the Iranian Revolution. When we saw really publicly for the first time how technology can both empower us and connect us and enable us to assimilate peacefully, but at the same time make us targets of our own governments. And this is basically how the organization came about, and it was a team of technologists that were helping the activists on the ground to access the internet and to also learn how to protect their information by using crypto, etc. From that point, we realized that this was a global phenomenon, and we added a policy dimension to this and are working around the world to make sure that policies and laws that are passed comply with international human rights standards. The UN Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, for instance, and here in the EU, the Charter of Fundamental Rights. And why are we in Brussels? That's a question that we get sometimes, especially for Europeans, because Brussels, it feels like a bubble, and it feels like it's a bit far away. And really, the EU can and should be used as a standard setting mechanism for a lot. And this is where I see the EU could possibly play a very good role in setting good standards and not bad standards to protect human rights, specifically in the digital sphere. I've been working in Brussels for about 3 years now with Access, and I can tell you after the Snowden revelations, there have been a lot of changes. There's certainly a mentality change. There's a lot more steps that need to be taken. But one of the changes that we've noticed is that digital rights is becoming much more a mainstream issue. It's no longer feasible for politicians to say, oh, internet stuff? I don't understand what that is. It's just a bunch of tubes, right? They really, at least the European Parliament and a lot of other policymakers on the EU level have been taking more of an effort to understand these issues and also connect them to human rights concerns. How can this law affect freedom of expression online? Rather than saying, you know, copyright should be protected, let's just block all the websites. So there's a little bit more reflection happening there. For privacy in particular, the Snowden revelations have also changed that. My organization has been working to support the data protection regulation, which the EU has put forward to update and harmonize and strengthen privacy rules in the EU. And frankly, before Snowden, it was quite difficult to get people to realize and to discuss the potential impacts versus the business interests of big data. And a lot of times it was very boring and tedious. You know, oh, why are you talking about privacy concerns? That's so boring. Because my iPad is awesome. You know, so after Snowden, we really see this technological positivism start to change, and people understanding privacy less as something that you have to hide, that people that use Tor and anonymous web browsing are probably pedophiles and criminals anyway, to a shift that is more like privacy is about autonomy, and it's about control, and it's about self-determination. And that's a very important thing, and it's even about sovereignty. After the Snowden revelations, when the Parliament initiated the inquiry, they were mad, as they should be, and we should still be mad. We haven't even gotten remedy for the abuses of our data, and I'm Canadian, so I'm not even sure how many times the NSA has taken my information. But, so there is certainly a change. We hope that with the new Parliament, there will continue to be this impetus to improve understanding of digital rights and to improve the connection between human rights and technology.
Just one follow-up question to you. It is often said that the NGOs which are working on civil rights, digital civil rights, are lacking funding, and there are like very few people. So I wondered how many people work at Access and how many people work in this field, in this kind of lobbyism field in Brussels. What do you have a number? And how many are Canadian?
Do have a number, and the number is not very exciting. Well, Access is, we're a growing organization. We have offices elsewhere. In the Brussels office, we are 2 people. Sometimes an intern. And there's another digital rights organization, European Digital Rights, that we work alongside with, that has 6 people. So there is absolutely, this is one of the major challenges actually that we're facing, is that particularly in the EU, civil society is very gravely under-resourced. And what we're facing, it's a little bit like a David and Goliath situation, where you have a handful of policy analysts and technologists that are trying to help politicians understand the law, bring these laws more in line with human rights, when we're really faced with what is basically an army of corporate lobbyists. And we really did see that in the negotiations and the debate on the data protection regulation, which was tabled in 2012 and is still being debated in the Council right now. It's a plague of lobbying, and it's becoming more and more problematic. So this is one thing, actually that's something you could probably do, is donate to your local digital rights organization. There's some here in Austria, Initiative für Netz Freiheit, and Europe versus Facebook. But it is an incredible challenge. At the same time, we have had surprising results. When we make enough noise, and when citizens come together, we did it with ACTA. If you remember, people came out in the streets, people contacted politicians, and the thing is that they want to hear from us, and they want to hear from you. And when they do actually change their minds. And so it really is possible. With the data protection regulation, corporations were not exactly successful in lobbying, trying to completely undermine this effort. And we recently had a very big victory in the European Parliament last month on net neutrality, which was also being attempted to be undermined by a lot of the telecommunications companies. So despite the lack of resources, we have had some success, but that is certainly a growing challenge throughout Europe.
Thank you. It's interesting that one could fit all of you into a Volkswagen bus, and hopefully nothing happens there. Max, you fought for the right for privacy long before people knew what the NSA was. So I wonder, your work regarding mostly private companies, how has that been influenced by the Snowden revelations? Is it now easier for you, or is it even harder because people say, who cares, the NSA knows everything?
I think first of all, people have known about the NSA before 2011. So, however, I think what we do look at is a cooperation between government and state, and that was actually wonderfully showed in the PRISM case, where we have private companies collecting all the information. We don't have any NSA spy in my phone, or no one is bugging my place anymore. It's the Googles and Facebooks that soak up all this information, and then the government comes up is like, thank you for getting it together, now we would like to have a backdoor. And that was interestingly rather helpful for us. It was interesting for me, especially in the privacy field as well, that we did have a huge kind of happiness factor about the NSA and the whole Snowden revelations, because it was like the early people that have already said it's really bad, and now they felt like, I was right and everyone sees it now. And it was kind of an awkward situation, because actually it's something you don't want to have, but it helped the whole discussion a whole lot, because you suddenly had you had it on front news. It was like in every evening news channel as like the first biggest topic, and suddenly this whole data protection topic became relevant. And in the whole data protection field, I think we're still very much at the beginning. Oftentimes feel like Greenpeace must have felt in the 60s or something, like pointing at, rivers where there's a lot of, I don't know, foam coming up and dead fish. I was like, look at it, it's really bad, we should do something about it. And Snowden was like the first big fish that came along. And I think that was extremely helpful to get out of this, outsider, you're just against technology, you see things that are just not there, field, and really get into the middle of society saying, I think I'm breaking up too, but to get in the middle of society and say that's actually something relevant because it's your phone right now where this information is collected and soaked up to the NSA. And that did the trick for a lot of the things. And that did the trick in the parliament as well, because before Snowden we really had a split where it didn't look too good for data protection. So like the conservatives and parts of the liberals were against stronger law on data protection, and social democrats and greens and part of the liberals were for it. But it was like a 50-50 split pretty much. And after the summer, it totally shifted around, and the vote was a huge majority and a huge win, and that was really kind of, I sometimes called it like the Chernobyl of data protection. So a really bad thing that happens, but people realize that there's a problem after it.
Yay!
Yeah, and it's a really awkward situation, but that's pretty much what happened, I would say.
So I think we are at the moment at a dangerous situation, I would say, because it's 1 year later, and what you call happiness, I would say many people were not
Depression.
were not so happy. Many people were outraged and fascinated or shocked what was going on, and you take some time and suddenly people get used to it, and suddenly people say, oh, I already know everything is surveilled, leave me alone. So my question to Mr. Weidenholzer would be what you mentioned this at the first beginning. There was some positive outcome of these evaluations, and I would say we are now in a dangerous situation that there's some apathy also in Europe. And Mr. Weidenholzer, I wondered, do you also fear that people come to terms with this kind of surveillance? And what do you say about this feeling that many European citizens, I would say, have this feeling, at least, this vague idea that there can be nothing done? What would you answer to them also in the next, let's say, 5 years? Is there something specific the EU can do now that we know it, now that people like Max are happy that everybody knows it, that we really fight this mass surveillance? Where can we start?
Yeah, I think that we achieved something, yeah? Because the Parliament came to terms. As Max said, we agreed anonymously on something which we were completely divided before the summer break. Yeah? And there was also, before the summer, was no public interest. I remember we organized a press conference once. Jan-Philipp Albrecht from the Greens, he was the rapporteur. He made a press conference in Vienna in the Parliament. Not one single journalist appeared. We tried it a week later together with Max, because Max was a little bit famous.
Conchita Wurst.
Two people appeared, but it was also, and we were discussing what can we do that we attract the interest of ordinary people about data protection, because we had been already involved, and we saw that it was a real big chance for Europe to come to a common position which could set global standards. This was actually our task, and we were really despaired that nobody was listening to us. We told them there's a chance for Europe, there's something really very important for citizens' rights, and nobody was interested. And then Snowden appeared, and everything changed. And we had this vote, and we had this interest. But on the other hand, so we were very happy about this, and it was the idea that we would immediately agree an agreement with the Council, who is the second legislator at European level. And the vote was in October, and until now nothing happened in the Council. So it was voted down in the Council, it was delayed. The British government was opposing it behind the scenes. The German government was playing a double game. So at the moment, nothing happened, and we believed there would be an agreement before the European elections to show ordinary people that Europe can achieve something, but the governments were not interested at all. Yeah? And I think this is one of the explanations why people are at the moment in this kind of apathy, because they think politics does not deliver. So this is the problem, and I think it's a problem of the governments. And on the other hand, you can say that the parliament, the parliamentarians, could achieve something because they reacted to this Chernobyl case. And so I personally think that there will be, after the elections, there will be a new commission, and we will put pressure on the Commission. I'm sure about this, and we will have a new agenda, digital agenda, and these things will come up. Even the Council is not reacting, so I'm pretty sure about this. And just one sign, industry is already trying to cope up with the things. They are talking at the CeBIT in Hanover on datability, and they are creating new words and so about the whole subject. So they are aware that there has to be done something about it. Yeah? But I hope that we as politicians can set the terms for that, and not the industry.
there's the question if the industry can save us from this mess as well, I would say. But let's focus on this issue, because I think this is one of the most interesting projects in the European Union. What you mentioned, the data protection regulation, in German called the Datenschutzgrundverordnung, it was already agreed upon in the European Parliament in the first reading, and still, as you mentioned, nothing has happened so far besides that. So, Mr. Weidenholzer, just to follow up, first of all, to the people who are not so familiar with this topic, can you explain what would this regulation bring? How would it make the situation better? How would it perhaps help us against agencies which are too noisy? And secondly, who is stopping this process? Who is preventing it?
Yeah, to be shorter than the first round,
Please, yes.
I think this is very important legislation, because it would be the first time that we would have a European standard, and we would have the possibility that every European citizen can access the law enforcement. This is a complete change of the whole thing, and Max Schrems would not have his problems anymore, so you can deliver on that later. So this would be important. There would be, of course, improvements for the citizens, like that you have the right to be forgotten, you have to be the right for explicit consent, which is very important. We normally always have this implicit consent where you're ticking something and then you agree on everything. So now there will be a kind of clear signal where you can actually give your consent. There will be privacy by design, privacy by default. There will be a lot of regulations, and the most important thing is that these regulations will also apply for European data in third countries. So even for European data in the US, and imagine that most of our data are in clouds in the US, this will really bring an improvement. And the last thing is, there is also a quite clear idea of penalties and fines. So if a company is violating the law, they can be fined by 5% of the net turnover, which is quite a good thing, and which shows that this could be practical. So this is a lot of improvements. And who is blocking it? I think it's the United Kingdom, who has, of course, special interests in that field. They are investing in a lot of new projects. They're investing in the Internet of Everything. They're investing in targeting marketing and all this kind of developments, and they are really against it. But we could vote. We could even take a vote against them. The problem is that also the German government is hiding behind the Brits, and I believe they say they want to keep the highest standards they have, yeah. But in the end, I think they're playing a very dirty game. They want to water down the German regulations, bringing it down to a lower level. I think this is the only rationale behind it. Otherwise, we would have already have this legislation for months now.
That's interesting. And Machon, you are, since the word United Kingdom fell, you're the expert on the UK here, so I ask you, do you have an explanation why a state like the UK might be like blocking such a regulation?
I can speculate. I'm actually very intrigued that Germany is being so obdurate as well in this situation, because my understanding was that the Germans had sort of got a lot of this out of their system, you know, with the Stasi and the Gestapo, and they put a quite good constitution in place to stop such abuses evolving in the future. And the Snowden disclosures have focused very strongly on some of the German issues. Not just Angela Merkel's personal telephone. I mean, you know, I love the fact you've all got your spy phones on the desk, by the way. But also the fact that the BND, the External Intelligence Agency, was complicit in developing the X-key score system for the NSA, which allowed them to hoover up in real time our communications much faster than even GCHQ could deliver. So I suppose that might be a reason why Germany is very complicit in this, because it's an interesting fundamental question. The Constitution says that the BND should not be doing this stuff. Did the BND do this without the knowledge of the politicians, or did it do it with the knowledge of the politicians? And the politicians now are desperately trying to cover it up, and that's why they're being supportive of the NSA in the USA and being obdurate within the European Union. I don't know. But the UK particularly, I'm going to use a very American phrase, which I love, which is, this is the ultimate clusterfuck. The special relationship, which is much vaunted by the weaker partner, the UK, with the stronger partner, the USA, is fundamentally based not on a trading partnership, not on political leverage, not even on the fact that Tony Blair was the one who allowed George Bush to claim there was a coalition of the willing, based on intelligence lies provided by the UK, to take us into an illegal war in Iraq in 2003. Now that sentence is almost as long as a German one. It's based on the fact that there is a unique special relationship between the intelligence agencies, because the UK peddles its lack of oversight, its lack of accountability to the US intelligence agencies, and allows them to do things, particularly within Europe, that they couldn't do otherwise. And this is the only reason that Britain still, in my view, has a seat at the top international table, is because of this special relationship, and it's only special when it comes to intelligence. So we know from the Snowden disclosures that GCHQ has prostituted itself to the NSA over the last decade. It has favoured the aims of NSA over what it should be doing, which is protecting UK national security. It is getting money directly from the NSA to build up these programs to snoop on not only the UK but the rest of Europe. Things like Tempora, the program where they are mainlining off all the fibre optic cables coming into Europe. So by doing the bidding of their overlords, the American intelligence agencies, they get to keep a certain degree of international clout. And that is why I think they are being so obdurate when it comes to trying to effect changes within the European community. The lack of oversight in the UK is particularly bad as well. They are the least legally accountable and most legally protected of all intelligence communities in any notional Western democracy. When it comes to disclosure, they are protected absolutely by the Official Secrets Act. When it comes to oversight, there is a toothless committee in the UK Parliament called the Intelligence and Security Committee, which, by the way, leapt into the breach as soon as Snowden came out, saying, no, we trust our intelligence agencies, they obey the law, without even having any investigation, so they're hardly holding the intelligence agencies to account. And we also have a very lax oversight regime to legalise their interception of our intelligence, our communications. So, for example, with the Tempora programme, they are mainlining off the fibre optic cables. Our Foreign Secretary is notionally the guy in charge of what GCHQ can do. And our Foreign Secretary said very quickly, I know exactly what they're doing, I've signed all the warrants, so they're working legally. Well, one, there is no such thing as a warrant that can cover the entire 500 million population of Europe. And why on earth would the British Foreign Secretary be mandated to sign off on the fact that 500 million of us can be intercepted by GCHQ on behalf of the NSA? Now, just one final point. We've known for over a decade that this has been going on because of the Echelon programme. This is something that was exposed by Duncan Campbell, an investigative journalist, who gave evidence at the recent LIBOR hearings. This is a programme of what is now called the Five Eyes, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, America and UK, where the intelligence agencies, particularly the SIGINT intelligence agencies, the electronic organisations, share all their product. Now, this is particularly close, the special relationship between the NSA and GCHQ. So in America, they cannot officially, legally intercept American citizens' communications. In the UK, they cannot do that without the say-so of a compliant foreign secretary. However, in the past, what they did was spy on each other's citizens and just share it all. It was the perfect backdoor against accountability. And there were measures. There was an investigation into this, and there was a report in July 2001 within the European Parliament saying, we are aware of these abuses, Europe needs to take steps, Europe needs to build its own infrastructure and knowledge base and protect the rights of its citizens. And that was going to go ahead, and it was fabulous. Unfortunately, then 9/11 happened 3 months later, and it was all forgotten. What I would suggest is we need to go back to those basic provisions and update them for the new Web 2.0 age.
Interestingly, what you tell us about the way UK and the USA work together, the same thing was told to me by Natasha Pirc-Musa, the Slovenian Information Commissioner at Parliament, and she said the Slovenian, and we're talking about Slovenia, 2 million people there, the Slovenian intelligence agency does it the same way. They're not allowed to spy on their own people, so they have this deals with the other agencies and they trade perfectly. So this is how the game works, apparently. Max, I think you wanted to add something.
Just on the German side, one thing, just reacting to what you said, we had the same thing. I was just in Canada and they pretty much said the same thing, and that's the absurd idea that we still have, that we have citizens' fundamental rights and not human rights. And that is, you know, the Article 8 European Convention of Human Rights that should theoretically protect us also against the UK government within Europe. But they really, again, have the huge enforcement problem that no other European member state is suing the UK or something like that, which would theoretically be an option, but politically it's not.
Would you like to? I can help.
So, yeah, I would go back. I mean, they're going to the European Court of Justice anyways. We went on the PRISM things. On the German side, that was very interesting to me too, because that was mind-blowing for a lot of the privacy people, that the Germans were suddenly against data protection because they're seen as like one American told me, the privacy Nazis of the world. Really bad word. But anyway, so the background story that I got there is I was talking to Friedrich, the former Interior Minister for Germany. And in Germany, it's really funny, privacy is a matter of the Ministry for Interior, which is not really the ministry that's usually too interested in privacy stuff and data protection stuff. However, he didn't care about this stuff at all. He was like, I just want my data retention, Vorratsdatenspeicherung. If I got that, I'm fine with privacy, I don't care for the rest. And there was his vice person, that's Dr. Stenzel, who is like the person in charge of the whole thing, and he's also the one representing Germany in the council. And he was actually giving the answers in this two-person discussion. So we had a third person actually giving discussion. Zeit newspaper had a huge problem because it was a two-person discussion, and now they had to print what Stenzel was saying in the name of Friedrich, because otherwise it wouldn't have made any sense. But that guy is really the person that's a problem in Germany, and he is to a certain extent arguing that there are so many problems with the data protection regulation. And what I've heard from other people is that he's coming up into the rounds in the council, coming up with 100 new problems and without a single solution. So there's a certain delayed tactics in Germany, and what a lot of people say is that they just want to get far away from the Snowden Chernobyl, so the people might forget 2 years later and they can get, you know, a nicer regulation through. So that's apparently the thought in Germany, and it might be mainly industry driven, I think. That's kind of the feeling I got. I was invited a couple of German conferences and there was almost no privacy NGO person or something there. It was pretty much a room full of industry people, and that was rather mind-blowing to me. So I think there is really a strong industry interest in Germany, which is a huge problem for the overall regulation.
Also, the whole affair, according to Mr. Pofalla, is over, and we're done with it already.
Yeah, I mean, the Germans, it's really funny because I was trying to get journalists to investigate it, because I said there's a huge pile of shit somewhere in that ministry, because why is that happening? And it was funny, for a lot of German journalists, it was unthinkable that the Germans wouldn't be for privacy, so they didn't further investigate. It took me a long while there was one newspaper article in FAZ now that was pretty much the stuff I gave to journalists. He was like writing an article out of it. And that was the first one where they explicitly said what's going on after we kind of shared the details and everything. And I still want to know what's going on in the mind of the Germans here, but we really see on the European Union level, the European Parliament was great, the Commission did great, in my perspective, and it's really the member states that are in the Council now kind of the big breakers there. And we could get serious law enforcement. I was last week I was in the US, and it was for the first time that I was discussing stuff with privacy people there, that they were taking Europe serious after the Google case and the data retention case. There was the first time that they were like, if the Europeans are really doing data protection, like seriously now, that could get us into trouble and we might need to change certain things. Before that, I was studying in Santa Clara and the Silicon Valley for half a year. the basic topic was the cute little Europeans, they can pretty much put whatever they want to do in their law and we're not gonna, nothing is ever gonna happen. Now what it really said, Google, you're accountable under the law, we do this and that. There has been a certain move that could help internationally as well, so that was the feedback I got in Europe, in the US a lot, so hopefully you get it through so that internationally we got someone.
Just wanted to add, I think there is ground for optimism because you were rather pessimistic in your question. So I think if they already realize that the European judges are taking their business serious, I think we have now as politicians or as parliamentarians, because there is a distinction, to deliver. And I think when they see that we really take it serious, I think then we can really change the atmosphere. And I would not say that we have to be too pessimistic. So it's rather growing, and we are in the beginning of a debate which will, I think, dominate the next decade.
Okay, no apathy, optimism. Okay, I understand. I would ask you to now perhaps answer a bit more quicker, because then we can cover a bit more ground. A lot of the things you talked about were, I think, also discussed in the inquiry at the European Parliament. And this inquiry was about the Snowden revelations and the mass surveillance. And Raegan, MacDonald, I wonder, did we really, I think you were really closely involved in this inquiry, something new? What are some we can take?
Well, in a lot of ways, the Parliament inquiry, at least in my opinion, is one of the most substantial investigations by an elected body outside of the United States that we've seen. So there is a lot of credit that can be given, and a lot of the process basically started in September and just finished last month or the month before. So the Parliament really made an effort to invite all sorts of stakeholders, including the GCHQ, which said, thank you very much, but our oversight is fine and we're doing everything the way we should. By the way, you have no jurisdiction over us. But even that is information in itself, and that helps not only to keep the discussion in the minds of everyone, but also to learn just about how the arrogance attached to some of these intelligence services. What we know now from the Snowden leaks is that what they're talking about is the golden age of surveillance. This is how the NSA and the Five Eyes describe today, the golden age. There's an incredible amount of arrogance attached to that, and that's something that came out to me out of the inquiry. There was a lot of investigations not only on intelligence services but also with companies, and a lot of the EU companies, the telecommunications providers, were asked to come and give testimony on whether or not they had been hacked, and if they were hacked by the NSA. The answers were often not what we would want. Sometimes there was an instance in Belgium, actually. Belgacom said, oh yes, and then they were asked again, they said, oh maybe, and then they asked again, they said no. There was nothing, never mind. But again, this is information that helps us understand just the scope and power of these intelligence services and what we're really up against. In the end, we have an inquiry report that is non-binding, but it does outline this digital habeas corpus of this plan forward that actually the new Parliament will be carrying out. And it includes, for instance, the conclusion of the data protection regulation as soon as possible, working on IT independence, really working and looking towards what the EU can do to make itself more secure and safe. And it's still non-binding, but this is, again, where the role of the citizens and where advocacy groups like Access come into play, where we will be basically tracking everything that they said they would do, and definitely hold them to this.
Mm-hmm. And in Machon, I think you were a witness in this inquiry of the European Parliament. What did you recommend to the committee? What were your suggestions? What should happen now?
Oh dear.
Or one aspect of it.
One was to go back and look at the recommendations post the Echelon inquiry and begin to implement them within the context of the 21st century. One was that the European Parliament should protect the basic rights of European citizens, not invest or protect the rights of foreign corporations or foreign governments who want to use us. And also in terms of management of the free flow of information and protection of whistleblowers. One of the key recommendations I gave was each national country should try and institute not only proper oversight of the spy agencies, and at the moment it's failing abysmally everywhere, but also perhaps institute a proper channel that potential whistleblowers could go to, either parliamentary or whatever, judicial, where they can give their evidence about crimes they've witnessed with the confidence that these disclosures will be properly investigated, and if found to be correct, then the perpetrators will be held accountable, prosecuted, reforms will be made, justice will be seen to be done. And I think that would be a really good step forward, because if there were such a channel, whistleblowers would not have to ruin their entire lives by whistleblowing. And also, if there was such a channel, then the intelligence agencies would have to be very conscious that if they do start stepping out of line in the way they've been doing, then something will be done about it. And so either we do that at a national level, and certainly in the UK we have nothing similar apart from the fact that the whistleblower goes to prison. So what I recommended was perhaps the European Parliament could look at setting up something that all European potential whistleblowers could go to, and they could hold all European intelligence agencies to account.
That's an interesting aspect. I mean, regarding the safety of whistleblowers, I mean, everybody's so happy that Edward Snowden came through and nobody wants to give him asylum for his whole life. Mr. Weidenholzer, if I remember correctly, during this inquiry, there was Edward Snowden explicitly asked the European Union for asylum, and there was this idea that the European Parliament should, in the report, call on governments within the EU to grant him safety. So, but at the end, the European Parliament was divided upon this issue, and they did not recommend this. And if I'm also correct, I think that even the Social Democrats were divided upon this issue. Now, I know you're often asked and said Mr. Snowden should have asylum, but can you explain to me why are even the Social Democrats so divided upon this issue?
I was voting for asylum, yeah, but against the voting list. But I think the problem was more a technical problem, that the European Union itself cannot grant asylum. So it is rather a question of asking other governments to do this. And I think it depends on the political will. Yeah? At the moment, there is no political will, and nobody wants to do the first step. Yeah? That's the problem. People know that there has to be a solution sometimes, but we're just delaying the thing. So I think this should be solved, because it is also not a good thing if Snowden is in the hands of the Russians. I mean, this is also not pure democracy, as some of my comrades used to call that. So I think there should be a solution for this. And I think the inquiry committee was very important, because, as you said, we had been the first parliament who really took up the questions in continuation of the echelon tradition, and we came up with clear suggestions. And one is that we want to rewrite a kind of European habeas corpus act, where there is really a real guarantee for law in the context of digital rights, so that this should be one of the most important tasks for the new government, for the new parliament, and in our timetable we agreed that there will be after the elections there will be the council asked for an amendment of the European treaties defining the aspect of data and data privacy in the context of civil rights, and I think this is a very important step. And we also had been very clear that we want to conclude the process of the data protection legislation, that we also want to suspend all the agreements we have with the US, like SWIFT, like other agreements, because we believe that at the present stage there is no necessity for this, because they are violated permanently, so there is no need of having any kind of legal cosmetics about the situation. So we had been rather clear, I think, and we delivered a lot of arguments also for a European cloud strategy. We think that there should be also a European encryption strategy and many other developments. So I think this is only one step. After the elections, there will be a new phase of discussing digital rights, and I would call for a kind of special committee. The Parliament can set up special committees which could deliver a report of the agenda for the next 5 years, because I really believe it would be not telling the truth if you would say you can solve the whole problems within one piece of legislation. This is not possible. So we need a new way of thinking about the whole thing, and sometimes it reminds me on the situation what existed in the beginning of the 20th century, where all of a sudden cars appeared on the roads and nobody knew how to deal with the cars, and some people they used to go in front of the car using the bells, and warning people that the car is coming and things like this. It's a little bit like this. So you have to have clear regulations. If you don't have clear regulation, people will exploit this in a commercial way, and so we actually need these rules, and this will be, I think, the possibility after this Chernobyl and after this public wave of attention for data protection, so that we can open a new phase, which will take some years to be settled.
I would like to invite the audience now to ask some questions, if there are any questions. So, are there any questions already? So otherwise we can...
Es geht nur gleich schlecht.
Sonja.
I see, besides, because we're all talking about intelligence agencies now, of course, but I think we need to see that there is this bigger intelligence, security, industry complex in the back. And we see a lot of surveillance technologies, and the European Commission is even financing the development of these technologies. And I'm really worried that we're going towards totalitarianism, and I'm not the only one. So the question is, what can we do about this? And I think that's one reason why the governments are not so much interested in, doing something.
I absolutely agree. There is no doubt about it. What Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex 50 years ago is now the military security intelligence complex. And I don't just mean state intelligence. There's a whole explosion of mercenary spy companies out there as well. And their official spies can be and have been put at the will of corporate interests too. So one of the cases, of course, was the FBI raid on Kim.com in New Zealand for copyright infringements 3 years ago. And this is a case where you have the resources of the state, the secret state, put at the disposal of corporate interests to go and do something illegal in a sovereign country. Now, this definitely goes back to the Mussolini quote. Benito Mussolini's definition of fascism is the merger of the corporate and the state. And that is what I see has happened already. And yes, it is a slide towards totalitarianism. And, you know, all governments, all intelligence agencies, if they can, they will take that power. And this is why we have constitutions. This is why Germany put such a strong constitution in place after the abuses. What can we do about it? I very much applaud what the European Parliament is trying to do and look forward to the legal changes that will be put in place. But we also, I think, individually can take steps as individuals to protect our privacy, because while those laws are grinding through the process, we can't rely on the fact that our state will protect our basic human rights, be it privacy, freedom of expression, not to be kidnapped, not to be tortured, not to be extrajudicially murdered even. So certainly on the privacy side, one of the things I mentioned earlier was, you know, get teched up if you're not already. Find a geek, go to a crypto party, which are proliferating across the planet, and learn some of the basic tools to protect your own privacy, be it OpenPGP encryption or Tor web browsing or OTR SMS chats, I think, which I hate, as I said before. And also look at with some detail at some of Snowden's later disclosures, not least the fact that they can actually, if you've got a modern computer, there will probably be bugs built into the hardware at the BIOS level. Can I, just out of curiosity, I know this is quite a techie sort of gathering, how many of you still use a Yahoo account or are willing to admit to it? Right. And are you aware of the Snowden disclosure that said that if you have a private conversation with your loved one over Skype from a Yahoo account particularly, and probably others as well, and it's video, and people do all sorts of naughty things on videos when they're talking to their loved ones, apparently, I've heard, then GCHQ has been spying on this. They've been recording it and keeping it. This is not about doing something wrong. This is about a conversation with, you know, in whatever form, with someone you love. And they have been spying on this and keeping it. And they've even done it for so long, they've issued guidelines to their staff members about how they emotionally deal with having to watch this stuff. This is sick. This is not about state security. It's not about terrorism. It's not about pedophiles. It's not about anything apart from totalitarianism.
Just to be clear to the man in the back, nobody implied that you do nasty stuff via webcams. That was not the message here.
I'm sorry, he's using a Yahoo account. That counts.
Are there other questions?
Actually, I have a question concerning Austria. So, as I've been made aware, like some months ago, I think there was a big newspaper thing about several countries on the world which are like thoroughly spied on by the NSA, like 100%. And one of them is Austria, as I've read. So I have a question to Max, as you are kind of on the forefront. How was the reaction? Like, because this...
Please speak into the microphone, we need it for the live stream.
Okay, sorry, okay. So there has to be some kind of agreement, so the Ministry of Interior like knows about these things, that the NSA is like spying on Austrian citizens. So what is your relationship, or how is the Ministry of Interior interested in your initiative?
So generally politically in Austria I got very positive reactions. Pretty much all the parties other than the right-wing parties have, you know, asked me to come by and if they can help me in some way. And, you know, that was, for example, how I got to know Joe, because he was just calling me and said, you do this crazy privacy stuff and we have a law here, can you tell us what the problem is? Which was good because most politicians wouldn't do that. Most politicians would just look at the lobbies that come up their door. And I think in Austria it's kind of I was working for the University of Vienna for a research thingy on government surveillance and interaction, and we had the fun to be at the government office, and I had the feeling personally that they are rather, you know, not the most sophisticated place ever. They do their, you know, normal crime stuff and do that very well, But in the whole surveillance thing, I genuinely had the feeling that we're more the country where everything passes through and the Austrians are not really getting what's going on anyways. That's kind of the same thing that Gerd René-Polly is oftentimes saying in interviews, that they kind of watch others, but they're not participating too much, and I would trust him on that. For the rest, I really don't know. And I had the feeling that in Austria at the time where the Snowden thing came up, Austria is just not relevant, other than United Nations and OPEC and all that kind of stuff, but Austria as a target, I doubt that we're all that relevant. And I had oftentimes the feeling that we just wanted to be a little spied on too. And so that was generally my perception on a lot of the stuff. There are other things in the Interior Minister where that concern me much more. Like if you look at the changes in Sicherheitspolizeigesetz in the last 10 years, we had about, I think, more than 20 changes or something that were always going one direction, with one or two exceptions. So, you know, data retention, all that kind of stuff. However, what we do have, and which helps a lot in practice, is a very active constitutional court on the side of data protection. So the Austrian Constitutional Court, if you compare it to other constitutional courts, has thrown out so many laws on the grounds of data protection as I've hardly seen somewhere else. So that's oftentimes kind of the cheerful side of it. Same thing for data retention, the referral to the European Court of Justice, 50 pages that pretty much said if it would be an Austrian law, we would have thrown it all out already, but what do you think, guys? And that was like between the lines what it said. So even though there are a lot of things that I'm not too happy about, I have the feeling that generally it's not all that bad.
But just to add one thing, I think I completely agree that if you ask or speak with people from certain ministries in Austria, you really get the strong impression that we are not on the forefront of surveillance actively. But when you look at the publications so far from the Snowden leaks, Austria really often is mentioned there. And it seems really evident that there is at least some, let's say, attention directed towards Austria, perhaps not towards the Austrian citizens, but for most towards the international organizations which are based here.
That I can see much more. And that's also where I had the feeling that Austria is generally kind of neutral in the whole game. Or at least, you know... Neutral
sounds nice.
Neutral in the sense of whatever you guys do.
Passively.
Maybe it's passive.
Yeah, passive is probably the better word, yeah. And that was generally my impression, but I'm not an expert on it, and I would think we would totally need someone like Polly or something to say more about it. But then again, you never know the people that are involved in it, what agenda they have in telling you certain things.
One aspect, we would also need a better Freedom of Information Act, we would need a Freedom of Information Act in Austria.
Cheers for that.
To get this information.
Yeah, but it doesn't look too good for it right now.
That's right, yeah. Other questions, please.
It has to be mentioned something in this direction already before, but I think on an event like this, it's important to point out what everybody can do personally to prevent this data collection. And maybe I can mention at this point that I found a site, prisonbreak.org. It's really nice. You can see all the corporate proprietary software and devices and all the alternatives. And yeah, also I would like to add that for cases it works really well for me. I've tried I changed a lot of years ago already to Linux, and this is great and everything, but especially, like has been mentioned, for Skype, I found no alternative. So I think the software is really at is not the crypted good open source software is at its beginning. So for example, for Skype, really I tried an alternative. I tried to make it work 1 hour long, and then I just give up.
You shouldn't use Yahoo webcam, that's for sure. Raegan MacDonald, I think you have perhaps some advice on that.
Yes, actually. One of the things that have come out of the Snowden revelations is that we now have the information at our fingertips, or some of it, and it's about really making informed choices about what services that we're using now that we know what the potential consequences are. So one of the things that I see a role for governments to do is to actually fund a lot of these privacy-enhancing technologies, which are now available, but they're often very complicated to understand how to use. So encryption is great. Tor is also great, but it's not so seamless. It's not as seamless as a lot of Google services, for instance. And this is something that we really have to work on as a community, and something that governments could contribute to is integrating these privacy technologies into the mainstream, making them much more easier to use. You can completely go to a crypto party and invest and learn how to protect yourself and reduce your digital footprint or your data exhaust. But at the same time, it's difficult to ask people to opt out of everything. I mean, there's 1 billion people on Facebook right now. I think even more. And they just acquired WhatsApp. So it's difficult. I feel like from an advocacy perspective, we can be advocating to participate in the digital world. You know, we want to use online games. We also know that the NSA is spying on angry birds. So we should be able to play games on our phone. You know, we should be able to use social media to connect us and to have a convenient life, to use technology, but also not be under consistent surveillance. And to your question about Skype, I agree. There has not been a new privacy-preserving alternative yet. But if you cut out the video, you can use Mumble. And that's actually very good. And it's an open source technology. It's very easy and very, very clear. You can hold lots of people on the call at the same time. And that's surveillance-free.
Yeah, just a quick one. I mean, Skype was fucked as soon as it was purchased by Microsoft. I mean, they were, you know, backdoored to the nth degree anyway. Just one other consideration I would just want to throw out there. We've been talking about what we can use for personal privacy, which are a bit clunky, I agree. More work needs to be done on them. One other aspect that a lot of people don't seem to be aware of is that the USA, under the Patriot Act, is claiming legal hegemony over any tier 1 domain name. So something like .com, .net, .org, .info. They say that is US territory, and we can take it down if we want to, with no prior warning and no due process. So, for example, you're a company and you registered .com, probably at vast expense, and you say something they don't like, or the copyright monopoly doesn't like, or something. They can just take it down, just like that, it'll vanish. And this is happening and has happened. So I would suggest as well, if you're concerned about your privacy, look at countries that offer more secure domains, like Iceland.is or like Switzerland.ch, which is where I base my website.
Just one little add on that. What we do have as a big problem is monopolies online. We currently really have this, you know, social networking with Facebook. We usually got the answer, oh, go somewhere else. But where do you go? You have, you know, diaspora as like the open source alternative, and you're very social with yourself and post your own picture and can look at it, and that's it. And that's not the idea of a social network. So that is a huge problem we do have, and that is actually a market failure to a certain extent. So there is a privacy concern and a spy concern on it, but there's also the marketing issue of it. There is no alternative that could ever live up to it. And the big problem of it is that we have closed networks. So it's closed communications networks that we have. WhatsApp is, all these new technologies oftentimes are, Skype is. And what we would need is to have more open networks again, and that's something that the regulator could do. It would be insane to say you can't email from TU to Uni Wien because it's two different providers. But exactly that is what social networks do right now. You can't send a message from one provider to the other. We have opened up all these networks in a lot of other cases. And on the side of the whole privacy game, it would be for the economy a huge issue to open up a lot of these things, which hopefully we'll see in the future as soon as politicians see these services as relevant enough. We opened up gas networks, electricity, trains, whatever. They were relevant enough to be opened up. For the social net or for internet networks, we would very likely need to do the same in the future, and that would solve a lot of these problems, hopefully.
So I think we can have like 2 more questions, 2, 3 more questions.
Yeah, I have a question about the new data agreement that is now currently discussed between the US and I think the European Parliament, because there was an article on it on Die Zeit, and it says that it would actually enable the US with more rights to the data of the European citizens, and that no European citizens really know about it because our media does not report it. So I would like to ask if you know maybe something about that and if that's true or not, because it was just in one article.
This agreement is negotiated between the European Commission and the US government, and the European Parliament has to vote on it.
Can you explain first which?
It's about the rights of European citizens in the US. So European citizens at the moment are not entitled to claim their rights in the US, and so the whole agreement is about the rights of European citizens gaining their rights in the US. The problem is that this is a very political question, and there is a lot of definitions and what is security, what is data, blah, 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 and so forth. And as with other agreements, the negotiations are not public. So even the European Parliament does only get information like we met again, it was a constructive round, or the negotiations had been not constructive, blah, 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 like this. So we do not get even all the meetings of the committee. The LIBE committee is the Committee for Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs, where all this stuff is discussed. Even the meetings when we deal with this subject are in camera. So all other meetings are open to the public, they are web streamed. Only meetings regarding disagreements, they are in camera, and so they are not open to the public. And even if we do not learn anything relevant, it is in camera. So they told us the last round that they fear that the negotiations will not come to a positive conclusion. But this was in end of March or something, or beginning of April. The Commission told us, yeah? But this is an important piece, of course, yeah?
I think, that agreement is still supposed to conclude this summer. Yes?
There's no result yet, yeah? So,
no, not yet.
So, and they will surprise us with a result, if there is a result, yeah? And will ask us to vote yes, yeah?
Yes.
Is it again the same as with ACTA, that you can only say yes or no?
No, it's the same thing, because this is part of the procedures, and will be the same thing with TTIP. It's the same game, yeah? Where the public is excluded from everything, and then at the end they urge you to say yes. Huh?
Yeah, unfortunately the European Commission still hasn't learned their lesson from the ACTA battle. And a lot of negotiations are still carried out in complete secrecy, and the TTIP, this massive free trade agreement between the EU and the US, is under a complete cloud of secrecy. Actually, they plan to keep the document secret for up to 30 years, which is just a complete archaic understanding of how the world works now. And we tried to explain to the Commission, not only us, but I mean all civil society groups, just saying, like, you know that we're going to have leaks, right? Like, the internet exists, you can't ignore it. Wouldn't it give you more credibility if you just did this out in the open? And by the way, the NSA is surveying all of your negotiations anyway, so it's not secret from the people that you're trying to keep it secret from. So what's the point? Why not loop civil society? Why not loop the public in? And there is still an incredible amount of resistance for that.
But just to add, because I was, regarding TTIP, the trade agreement, tabling an amendment asking for public discussion of the agreement, and even in my committee, in the Internal Market Committee, my colleagues voted against me. Yeah? So the question is, even if parliamentarians say, I do not want to know what's going on, this is a bit strange. Yeah?
May I quickly ask one follow-up question? Is this procedure, this kind of not keeping the civil society in the loop, is this now getting better, or is it still, even after ACTA, getting worse? Is it become more and more normal to exclude civil society, or do you see the opposite as well?
It really depends on which directorate of the Commission. The one running the TTIP is DG Trade, yeah, geguckt. And they have a very interesting understanding of what civil society is, who they're represented, and so they definitely heard the noise from all citizens that this agreement should certainly be more inclusive, that you should have learned your lesson last time, and so the DG Trade has started doing these civil society multi-stakeholder briefings, normally after each negotiation round. And this was supposed to be, it was called a dialogue before, but then what we realized is that they were just briefing us on a very, very broad strokes of what they might have talked about, when we explained that a dialogue is actually something that we can, we have a discussion that goes back and forth. And we can actually provide you with information and analysis on these very specific issues that you're talking about. And they then said, okay, yes, thank you for your comments, and then they changed it to a briefing. That was their solution. So that's one section of the Commission. Certainly, there is more of a general interest in promoting multi-stakeholderism. The European Parliament and other parts of the Commission do make an effort to consult other stakeholders, but this again relates to the same problem that I mentioned before about the resource issue. So a lot of civil society is very undercapacitated. We don't have a lot of money, there's not a lot of people, so when you get these invites, there's basically empty chairs at a lot of discussions on policy and legislation, which civil society actually cannot sit at, because they can't afford to travel from Romania to Brussels for 2 full days of conferences that may or may not have any kind of result. They don't have the travel funding, they don't have the time, so they can't actually participate. But who does fill in those chairs is individuals that represent civil society, which are sometimes more blatantly, we call them astroturfing organizations. So there's grassroots movements, people that work, advocacy organizations like Access, but then there's astroturfing groups which are funded by companies saying they represent citizens or human rights, and actually don't. So we saw that in the data protection regulation, there was an organization, the European Privacy Association, that when you look on their website and you hear what they're advocating for, it's, wait a minute. That's not civil society. Oh, also I can't find where they're funded, and then you dig and dig and dig and dig, and then it's a US lobbying corporation that is funding them. So this happens a lot, and this is actually one of the risks that we have if we don't actually address the resource problem.
I would say one last question is possible, yeah?
Hello, my question would be about, you mentioned the civil society, and here in this room and on the live stream, I guess there's a couple of people who are interested in the topic, and apart from you guys, who shall we follow on Twitter, for example? Could you name some?
Or who should you give money to?
For example, so if everybody from you could give us one or two suggestions, there's European elections, are there maybe even, who in Brussels can we trust?
That's a really good question. Actually, we are the members of a very big digital rights association called European Digital Rights. And this is a association of groups from around Europe. There are 37 members right now. Yes? Thomas is saying yes. Initiative for Netzfreiheit in Austria is a member. We're members, and they also have an office based in Brussels. These people really need money, and it's a huge issue. And one of the problems that EU civil society has is that there aren't a lot of sources of money, but then you have big corporations that are almost tripping over themselves to give you money. But that is a more complicated issue, and government funding can also be complicated in terms of independence, but also bureaucracy. So one of the best and easiest ways to do that is to trust. You can trust EDRI, and you can also send them your donation.
Okay, we can have one.
Can I just mention a couple of organisations too? I think he asked all of us, so...
Okay, yeah. Yes, please, go on.
Well, my four passions are what I call my four wars: the war on drugs, the war on terror, the war on the internet, and the war on whistleblowers. So I just want to raise three organisations which are severely underfunded and do need help. One is the Sam Adams Associates for Integrity and Intelligence. These are previous intelligence personnel who award people coming out of the agencies who display integrity, and we want to encourage more of them. There's Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, which is police and judges and lawyers and everyone else, basically saying that the war on drugs has failed and is causing more societal harm than good. And they would welcome any help and support. And finally, there is a new organisation coming, which is called the Courage Foundation, of which I'm one of the directors. And this is being put in place specifically to support existing high-level whistleblowers like Edward Snowden, raise funds for their legal defence, which they inevitably need because they are persecuted, and also to advocate for them, and also to say that you can survive the process and try and encourage future whistleblowers to come out and say, we can support you too if you do choose to do that. So there's a few organisations that I would like to flag up.
Okay, that's really interesting. Also interesting, as you said, that there is like this idea to bring like constructive ideas from within these forces. Like that's quite interesting. So I would like to ask you all for like a final short statement, because one of the interesting aspects I think we learned is that there are ideas what we could do. It's not totally hopeless, and this is also like a really, really tough question, I know, but we have had now 1 year since the beginning of the Snowden leaks, and there will be elections this weekend, and there's the question what will happen, what should happen in the next year, like the year 2 of the Snowden leaks. So do you have, all of you, do you have one idea what could be done, one specific project or one website or one thought you would suggest to the audience?
Well, I would suggest keep an eye out for the launch of the Courage Foundation, which will be couragefound.org, because, as I said, we want to show that whistleblowers can survive, and the world is in such a parlous state at the moment. We need more whistleblowers coming out and showing the degree of totalitarianism that we have slid into living under. So I think that's the biggie.
Mm-hmm. Max, what is your suggestion? I guess we should all buy your book, which comes out soon. So yeah,
I would rather say donate something for the Europe versus Facebook thing, because we need the funding for suing Facebook. More interesting than the book, probably, or more helpful. I'm really not making good advertisement.
I hope the publishing house isn't here at the moment.
He hopefully doesn't see anything of that. No, what I really think what we need in Europe is enforcement. So we do have very strong laws. We do have fundamental rights on the European level, on the European Courts of Justice, but also through the European Courts of Human Rights, and we just need to enforce it. We're talking about it, and we say, you know, what we do at most of these panels is we point fingers at the US and say, now we know the enemy's over there, and we all go home for beer after that and feel great because it's not bad as Austria, but it's bad as foreign US. And that can't be the solution. We really have to sit down and say, if we want to have fundamental rights in Europe, we have to enforce them. That's what we did with Facebook as one example, but anyone else can take the next one up. And I'm very hopeful that we can start something like a privacy enforcement NGO in Europe that doesn't only say that things are bad, but also goes after these guys, like Verein für Konsumenteninformation does that for consumer issues. We would need to do something like that for the privacy thing, and that's my hope, to at least set that up until the end of the year, and we'll see where that goes.
So a few things. First, I would say vote. It's very important. I know the EU seems like it's a bit off in its own little bubble. But basically these representatives, whether you like it or not, will be representing your interests for the next 5 years. We're probably facing a more conservative, most likely more Eurosceptic parliament. What we do need instead is people that are more knowledgeable or open to be more knowledgeable about these digital issues, that are prepared to face the challenges that we're faced with now with regards to our privacy and how to get our human rights back. The second thing I would say is be noisy. Always be noisy. Politicians want to hear from you. When they get those emails or faxes or letters, it really does make a difference, or those phone calls. When we can show the EU system or even on the member state level that we are watching, they behave in that way. But if we behave, basically those that want to undermine our rights and freedoms don't want you to pay attention. And if we don't pay attention to them, they will behave in that way. So basically we should be watching and we should be noisy.
So not just the NSA should be watching us as well. Okay.
If they're going to watch us, we should watch them too.
Mr. Weidenholzer.
Yeah, in a different way. So I would also say vote of course the right politicians, but then
small hint here.
Then I think the most important thing is keep on pressuring politicians. In all these issues, we could really see that public pressure also moves politicians. So when I entered the parliament, I was quite a young politician then, so 2 years ago, so just came in with ACTA, and there was really big public pressure, and it changed the whole game. It was the same thing with data protection, where we also built on this public involvement, where we could really move things, and we could also show that some politicians were plagiating and copy-paste the proposals of Google and so, and those proposals had been deleted because this was just public then. And the third thing was net neutrality, where it again happened that public pressure could change the whole thing. So we really believed we could never turn it down, yeah? But it happened at the end that hundreds of thousands of people were putting pressure on my colleagues, and all of a sudden we had been really surprised by a big vote pro net neutrality. And I think all these examples show you that politics is more than just voting. Politics is about involvement, about communicating with politicians, and I think this will, if we come upon these terms, I think we can really change many things also in the discussed context, that we really need a new public debate on privacy in the digital world.
Let me just say 2 quick final sentences. First of all, thanks to all of you who were here, who were such a good audience, such an interested audience. Thanks to the Renner Institute, to the VSSDÖ and the office of MEP Weidenholzer, who organized all of this here. And I at least learned some things today. I learned that apparently we live in the golden age of surveillance, where even intelligence agencies spy upon games such as Angry Birds. But I think I also learned that I find it very interesting that we should, even though the situation seems somehow serious, we should not underestimate the power of public pressure. Thank you all.